Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Meng Zihan. Coming up in this edition, US President Donald Trump has voiced confidence that Hamas will agree to a truce with Israel after a meeting with the visiting Israeli Prime Minister. Kenya says the latest clashes between police and protesters have killed at least 11 people and injured many others. And the foreign ministers of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations will meet in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia this week. We begin in the Middle East. The US president has voiced confidence that Hamas will agree to a truce with Israel. It came after Donald Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meantime, Israel has continued its strikes on Gaza, killing more people, including families in refugee camps. Rami Al-Magari has more from Gaza City.
Israeli aircrafts and drones had carried out a series of air strikes and bombardments in many parts of the Gaza Strip, including Gaza City, where we are doing the live now, in different locations, and the Rimal neighborhood in the heart of the Gaza City, especially near the Ministry of Health in Gaza, where 6 people were killed, 6 people of same family member were killed. This strike was similar in 2 refugee camps in central Gaza Strip, where Israeli aircrafts hit 2 homes in both Al-Bureij and Nusayrat refugee camps in central Gaza Strip, where at least 10 family members were killed in both strikes. In the southern Gaza Strip, mainly in Rafah city, there were reported 6 people were killed by Israeli army fire near a site for distributing the aid supplies provided by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a U.S. NGO backed by the Israeli army, as well as the injury of many others who are seeking food supplies in this site and another site in central Gaza Strip, Netzarim corridor. This is a repetitive situation over the past 2 months, almost, where at least 500 people were killed seeking aid at those sites. And the international organizations and United Nations have called on this organization to stop working, as United Nations has described the work of this organization as a death trap. Yes, this situation comes against the backdrop of renewed talks over ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, mediated by United States, Egypt, and Qatar and the people here in Gaza, amidst this intensive situation of escalation on the ground by the Israeli army, hope that there will be a breakthrough that would relieve them finally after they have been exhausted by deaths, starvation, and hunger over those 3 months since the ceasefire broke out in 18th of March.
That was Rami Al-Magari reporting. In the US, hopes are fading for finding survivors after deadly flash floods devastated parts of Texas. A torrential downpour before dawn on Friday caused the river to burst its banks. Authorities say at least 104 people have died, and the number is likely to rise as dozens of others are still missing. Nitza Soledad Perez has the story.
It's day 4 along the Guadalupe River. Hundreds of search and rescue teams are working their way along the banks, looking for any signs of life. If they find a personal belonging or a piece of clothing, they carefully set it aside. And that's when officials and cadaver dogs move in to take over. The scope of the search is massive. We're talking about a 100-kilometer area that needs to be come through. The numbers tell the story. Dozens dead, dozens still missing. But for every heartbreaking loss, there are also incredible stories of survival. More than 800 people have been rescued or evacuated since this disaster began. Others are still looking for friends and loved ones.
We are still actively looking for our friend who is missing, but we've got his name on a lot of lists, and we've been going around to all the ERs and hospitals and Red Cross to get his name out there. He's late 50s. His name's Bill Houston. So he was at the campground just down here where you can kind of see him pulling stuff out. He was camping in a trailer that we found. The trailer was wrapped around a tree the other day, and just discovered his car yesterday and confirmed that. Some of his belongings are starting to wash up today, so my parents are going to go collect that. But we haven't heard anything from him. Last we heard from someone on Facebook that was camping over there with him and saw him alive in a tree, clinging on around 4:30 or 5 a.m. the day of the floods, and we haven't heard anything since then.
It's day 4. Do you think your friend will be found alive?
At this point, no. We're starting to prep for that. It's my dad's coworker. It's one of his best friends, so we're just holding a lot of room for that and still looking, but it's hard to maintain hope right now.
This community is still in crisis mode. Several million people in central Texas are under flood watches this Monday. The area is without power and critical infrastructure has been damaged to a point that authorities cannot provide an estimate on when the lights will come back on. But people here are not waiting for help. They're helping each other.
That was Nisa Soledad Perez reporting. President Donald Trump will extend the pause on the so-called reciprocal tariffs from Wednesday to August the 1st. He announced tariffs ranging from 25% to 40% on 14 countries, including Japan, South Korea and Indonesia, starting next month. Tony Waterman has details from Washington, D.C.
President Trump posted those 14 letters that he sent out to U.S. trade partners on his social media platform. This is the first batch that was mostly aimed at Asian nations, and there was really a rhythm to the language that was used in all of these letters. Not only did it inform these countries of their tariff rate, the president also said that there'll be higher rates on anything that is transshipped, so an item originating from another country but then passing through a secondary country in an attempt to avoid U.S. tariffs. The president also left the door open to raising these tariffs even higher because he said that at the current rates, they are not enough to close the trade deficit. And this was part of the reason why he imposed these tariffs to begin with. He also said that if companies wanted to avoid paying these levies, that they should build their factories in the United States, and that if they decided to do so, that his administration would do everything possible to expedite the approval process, saying they could get it done in a matter of weeks. The U.S. In these letters also said that it would perhaps consider adjusting the rates if the countries open their markets to U.S. companies and eliminated trade barriers for U.S. firms. So there is a healthy dose of threats in all of these letters. Another thing the president mentioned was that if any of these countries try to retaliate, to impose their own tariffs on U.S. goods coming into their countries, then he will raise these tariff rates by an equal amount. It seems as if there might be some trade negotiations that can still take place, some wiggle room, because this date has now been pushed from July 9th. The president signed an executive order pushing it back to August 1st. So that gives about 3 weeks. And the president said he was pretty firm when it came to those tariff rates that were sent out to these trading partners, that he would listen if they had some ideas, but that he was very firm in what those rates were going to be. So it seems as if he is playing both sides of the fence here, saying that these rates have been pushed back, that they're going to be having these discussions, but also saying that he may not actually adjust things all that much.
That was Tony Waterman reporting. Turning to Africa, Kenya's government-run National Commission on Human Rights says the latest clashes between police and protesters have killed at least 11 people and injured many others. Nairobi remains locked down with major roads and highways leading into the city closed. Robert Nagila has more from the Kenyan capital.
Protesters hit the streets just outside Nairobi city and across some towns in Kenya less than 2 weeks after another protest on June 25th. Although Monday's showdown had less participants, it also saw clashes between demonstrators and police who used tear gas and water cannons. And occasionally, things got quite intense, like this instance just outside the capital city. Moments later, a group of angry demonstrators emerge carrying a young man who appears lifeless. Shortly after, they are sprayed by a police water cannon as the officers retreat. Meanwhile, the roads in several neighborhoods across Nairobi were rendered impassable. The scene is one that's been replicated across all major highways leading into the capital city. Police have blocked access into Nairobi, paralyzing transport and movement of people. This time around, police adopted different tactics, sealing off the capital's central business district and throwing a security cordon around the suburbs. Schools, shops and businesses remained shut as access to the central business district was strictly limited.
As I came to work, I was shocked because there are no people, no business, not even one bus.
This man says he was forced to walk to work.
They blocked the roads. Buses are not operating to town and I had to go to work. So I walked to work. I have finished work and no buses are going from town.
The 7th of July is marked annually to commemorate the struggle for multi-party democracy in Kenya. But this latest anniversary coincided with another ongoing clamour for good governance and justice against police officers accused of extrajudicial killings. Violent clashes between police and protesters also took place in several other towns across the country. Several leaders have called for a national dialogue to address the root causes of the protests.
There was Robert Nagila in Nairobi. And finally, here in Asia, the foreign ministers of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations will meet in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia this week. Their counterparts from dialogue partner countries such as China, the US and Russia will also participate. The meeting comes at a crucial time of challenges, including newly announced US tariffs on 6 ASEAN members and regional tensions. Ryan Meltzer has more.
I'm here at the Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre in the shadow of the Twin Towers, the venue for this week's ASEAN Foreign Ministers gathering and related meetings. Now, aside from all the ASEAN foreign ministers, barring Myanmar's, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are also expected to attend these talks. Now, from my experience at these gatherings, Wang Yi will seek to hold one-on-one talks with his US and Russian counterparts, as well as holding other bilateral talks as well. These meetings take place amid worries over looming US tariffs and simmering regional geopolitical tensions, the bloody civil strife in Myanmar, and the border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand that has indirectly resulted in Thailand's courts suspending the country's prime minister. Later in the week, the East Asia Summit meeting will bring together ASEAN ministers as well as those from East Asia, Australasia, India, the US and Russia.
Some of these platforms tend to be quote-unquote hijacked by certain great powers, and the narrative of those forums sometimes tend to be a bit one-sided or lopsided. The East Asia Summit, which is basically convened by ASEAN, tend to be a more neutral ground. And that gives dialogue partners the opportunity to very candidly to share their opinions.
Later this week is the still bigger ASEAN Regional Forum, which focuses on security and political issues and avoiding conflict in the Asia-Pacific. It's a rare forum in which both South Korea and the DPRK take part. Given the threat of monstrous US tariffs hanging over many of the ASEAN countries, regional geopolitical tensions, the continuing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, and the presence of all the major powers, it's likely to be an intense week here in the Malaysian capital.
That was Ryan Meltzer reporting. Recapping today's headlines before we go, US President Donald Trump has voiced confidence that Hamas will agree to a truce with Israel after meeting with the visiting Israeli Prime Minister. Kenya says the latest clashes between police and protesters have killed at least 11 people and injured many others. And ASEAN foreign ministers will meet in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia this week. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. And once again, thank you for listening.